In the nation's northwest corner is Washington, an evergreen playground blessed by an unusual variety of natural attractions.
The towering mountains, the modern, friendly cities, the innumerable rivers and lakes.
Our resident historian, Feliks Banel. When do I start talking? I don't want to interrupt nice voice-sounding man. Feliks is here for All Over the Map, a quick look at the stories behind the names of local places. This week, the fraudulent origins of Kennydale, plus the movie star who was once a lifeguard there. Fraudulent?
Yes. So there were three big events in 1969. I think you had the moon landing on July 20th, you had Woodstock on August 15th, and then the residents of Kennydale voted on November 18th to become part of the city of Renton. So, the origins of Kennydale date to around the end of the 19th century. Like pretty much every community around here, it began as a real estate scam. Clarence D. Hillman, namesake of the Hillman City neighborhood in Seattle, came to this area in 1896, began buying and selling real estate. By 1904, he owned several acres north of Renton on the east shore of Lake Washington. He called it Lake Washington Garden of Eden. Aim high there. Despite major promotional efforts such as free train rides and free boat rides for the suckers, for the potential buyers, Hillman didn't sell nearly as many lots as he hoped, and so very little of the promised infrastructure and amenities were built. It was pretty much just vacant land out there. There wasn't any streets or anything like that. To add insult to injury, the post office rejected the name Lake Washington Garden of Eden for having too many words. Hillman's right-hand con man was his wife's brother, Frank Kenny, so Kenny was also his wife's maiden name. So they came up with Kennydale as a second-choice name, and the post office went with that. Hillman moved on and eventually went to prison at McNeil Island for mail fraud from an unrelated real estate scam in 1911. And Kennydale, it didn't grow as quickly as he had promised, and it grew slowly over the next several decades. It had connections to the water, of course, and you could get back and forth across Lake Washington. It was right along the railroad tracks there, too. So it became, it grew fairly steadily and finally became part of Renton in early 1970. Now, a lot of old-timers have heard the story that Clint Eastwood was a lifeguard for King County Parks at Kennydale Beach in 1950.
Really? Yeah,
Clint was only 20. He and his family had moved up here from California for his dad's job. Now, when I worked at King County Parks 20 years ago, the archives had a picture of Clint standing with a group of about 30 other lifeguards.
So this is true.
It's totally true. Oh, yeah. And all the teenage guys in this picture, and I've looked for this picture, I couldn't find it. All the teenage guys are pale and flabby, and they look like they're 40 years old, the way people did back then. And all the young women have bizarre hairdos, and are wearing like cat-eye glasses. They also look like they're in their 40s. And Clint is standing there. He's tall, tan, chiseled, and already looks like a movie star, if not a completely different species from these other people who were serving there at Kennydale Beach. Clint's family had lived in Seattle from 1949 to 1955. They lived in Mount Baker. They built a house in the Highlands, but then they went back to the Bay Area. And Clint apparently couldn't stay away from the water. There's a picture of him in the Seattle Times with his friends on this beautiful speedboat, I think belonged to his family, when they rescued a guy whose sailboat had capsized near Mount Baker in Lake Washington in April 1950. He got drafted into the Army for the Korean War and didn't go overseas and was stationed at Fort Ord in California as a swimming instructor. And then I think this was the first time he appeared on the front page. He's the front page of the Seattle Times, October 1st, 1951, when he survived a plane crash the day before off Point Reyes, California. Clint Eastwood was a passenger on a Navy prop plane that departed from Sandpoint Naval Air Station and then ran out of fuel. So they crashed a couple miles offshore. And again, the swim instructor guy, he paddled ashore with a life raft. So did the pilot. And then it's a picture of him that says Clinton Eastwood, Private Clinton Eastwood, right on the front page of the Times. And on a happier water-themed note, Clint, by then a TV star in Rawhide, made a triumphant return to Seattle in 1961 and rode in the Seafair Parade as a sort of a transplanted local boy made good. And these stories about the plane crash came up when he was making Sully a few years ago, because apparently it gave him sort of extra street cred, having survived his own plane crash on the water and then paddled ashore. Yeah. And it's not clear if, after that triumphant return for Seafair back in 61, it's not clear if he ever made a triumphant return to Kennydale Beach. I don't think he did.
You don't? Well, I think it's high time he visits again. There could be a whole reunion there.
Yeah, and this whole notion that, the Eastwood family made a pretty big impact. His mom's was a pretty serious amateur golfer. She's in the society pages a lot. His dad was an executive for a big company here and makes political opinions and stuff. And their house is still there in the Mount Baker neighborhood. So it's sort of this hidden legacy of Clint Eastwood here in Seattle, not just being the lifeguard at Kennydale Beach, but being this sort of local guy saving people on the water all the time back in the early 1950s.
I love your description of people in the 1950s. Actually, that's the description of any Seattleites at any time. We're pasty, pale no
flabby.
One should see us.
Yeah, I'm going to keep looking for that photo. If I ever find that photograph, we'll post it on mynorthwest.com. The story about today's Kennydale origins is there as well, but I'll keep looking for that Clint Eastwood photo.
All right, please do.